The man in the navy windbreaker lifted the pistol like it weighed nothing and pointed it at my chest over a $5,200 HOA fine. And that is the exact moment the world split into before and after. He had a badge clipped to his belt that looked like it came off a kiosk and a plastic placard on his dashboard that said police in big letters with no department beneath it. But fear doesn't wait around while you audit fonts. Fear just presses your heartbeat against your ribs until you can taste metal. Behind him, the woman who sent him our neighborhood's self-crowned queen. The HOA president everyone called Karen, even though that happened to be her real name, stood at the edge of my gravel drive with her arms crossed like she owned the county line. She'd been slapping orange violation stickers on my cedar railing for weeks, claiming my cabin counted as part of her master-planned kingdom even though you have to leave the subdivision, cross a county road, and climb a half-mile of switchbacks to even see my roofline. When I listed the place to fund my sister's medical bills, she decided that my for sale sign was an attack on community standards. Then came the certified letters with a made-up, expedited enforcement fee, the email blast calling me a threat, and finally the text on a Friday night. Your fine is now $5,200, pay by Monday or face legal enforcement. Monday arrived with a gun. I should tell you why my hands didn't shake as badly as they could have. The cabin was full of people who understood danger like a second language. For years, I've leased the place a few weekends each quarter to agencies that need remote terrain for training, wilderness search and rescue, EMS drills, and yes, sometimes federal teams who need a quiet environment. That weekend, a small group of U.S. Marshals was up for a low-profile orienteering and rural apprehension course. They'd chosen my ridge because you can't hear a highway and the coyotes teach you how to listen. They were here as peaceful guests, out of uniform, running maps and compasses at dawn and swapping stories about safe arrests at night. I had told the HOA once, politely, that my property was my business and that if they wanted to talk, they could walk the switchbacks with me and bring a map. They sent emails instead. The windbreaker guy barked at me to get on my knees. He called me by my street address from the subdivision below, the wrong one, and he called me boy even though I'm 41 and taller than he is. He said, "You're under arrest for refusing a lawful order from the Homeowners Association," and you could tell he liked the way the words lined up in his mouth. Karen chimed in from the road, telling him to just do it because the board voted. And then she swung her gaze toward my front porch like she thought the porch would be impressed with her. That porch creaked. Then the door opened and a quiet man in a flannel emerged holding a coffee mug that said, "Good morning. I'm tired." He set the mug on the rail so gently it felt like a bell. "Sir," he said, voice measured, put the firearm down and stepped back. He didn't shout. He didn't announce anything yet. He just looked at the man's grip and his trigger finger and the tension in his shoulder and did a small calibration in the space between them. You could see it if you know what to watch. The man's eyes flicked from the flannel to the badge the flannel didn't show. And he smirked, which is what people do when they're about to make a decision they can't walk back. Karen screamed, "He's resisting." She loves a scene the way lightning loves the tallest tree. She turned to a neighbor holding a phone, ordering him to record so they could upload a hero story later. The windbreaker guy's muzzle wobbled, then steadied again on my sternum. That's when the Marshals let the room stop pretending. 3 more stepped out behind the man with the coffee, and in one sound like the wind organizing itself they announced their office, displayed their IDs, and took up positions that were not theatrical and not optional. The windbreaker tried to adjust his badge so the light would like it more. The flannel marshal repeated himself with a different temperature. "Firearm down. Hands where we can see them. Do it slow." The man with the gun froze, and somewhere in the trees a jay scolded all of us for being ridiculous. What happened next felt like watching water take its shape. The fake cop's feet moved an inch back, his finger slid away from the trigger, his shoulder dipped, and in that window the flannel moved like a sentence finishing. 2 other marshals closed and the gun left a hand. It made a dull sound on wood, the sound of a threat hitting reality. They secured him smoothly because smooth is how you keep people from getting hurt, and then they stepped him back onto the gravel where nobody would slip. He tried to claim he was tasked by the board and sworn as neighborhood security. And the flannel's eyebrows did that tiny lift that means, "Oh, this again." Karen started shouting about federal overreach and property values and the bylaws that let her do anything if she called it landscaping, and I realized she actually believed a fine could buy a bullet for the person who refused to pay it. She wasn't just bluffing. She'd subcontracted her fantasy to a man who truly thought a windbreaker made him the state. While the marshal secured the weapon and ID'd him, I texted the county sheriff and sent a pin with "Please roll units, possible impersonation, weapon drawn." My neighbor down the ridge, Alma, who works the dispatch desk some nights, replied 10-4 before my pulse could count to 3. I expected that to be the end of the wild part, but every story worth telling keeps a twist in its pocket. The twist was a fourth marshal I hadn't met yet, a woman the others called Jenkins, stepping around the porch post and saying, quietly but in a way that made the ground remember what it's for, "Ma'am, you need to know that calling a man to point a gun at your neighbor over a debt you invented isn't just ugly. It's a crime with several names." Karen turned to face her like a bull who had just realized the red cloth was attached to a train, and then her face did something I'll never forget. A flinch of recognition, not of authority, but of family. She said, "Lydia?" And Jenkins's jaw worked once and then settled. "Hello, Mom." The mountain swallowed every other sound. For a second, even the J held court in silence. Jenkins kept her voice flat and professional, but you could hear the ache under it like a guitar string tuned one step too tight. "I told you last year when you forged Mrs. Behrman's yard citation that if you dragged a gun into your games, I'd be done pretending it's community. You dragged a gun. You sent a man with a record to my neighbor's porch to collect a debt you made up. You lied on a document and you recruited a felon to play dress-up cop." The windbreaker man sputtered that he'd never been convicted, only misunderstood, and Jenkins's partner answered without looking at him, the kind of fact recitation that doesn't need flourish. Assault plea, 2018, bar fight, probation violated twice. The porch boards knew who he was and so did the database. Sirens braided up the switchbacks. 2 sheriff's SUVs and a state trooper made the bend and idled beside the mail barrel at the turnout. The marshals briefed them fast because time is a blade in scenes like these. The deputies took custody of the windbreaker and secured the weapon in a brown paper bag that always makes me think of grocery day. Karen kept saying words like board authority and citizen's arrest and sovereign covenants, and Sheriff Cole, who has eyes like fence posts you can trust, told her calmly that covenants don't deputize guns and that if she filed so much as a sneeze on county paper she'd better expect it to be read and verified. He asked about the fine. She said it was for an unapproved sale and short-term rentals. He asked to see the map that put my cabin under her rules. She showed him a map of a different world. We all went inside because paper belongs on tables, not on gravel. The marshals laid out the documents like cards: my deed, my survey, my permit for occasional training leases, the HOA's master declaration which stopped at the edge of the creek, and the letter with the $5,200 number that still made my eyelid tremble. Sheriff Cole read quietly while Jenkins stood at the window breathing like someone learning again. Karen kept glancing at her, trying to argue with the past without using the present. Then Alma pulled up at the top of the drive with a satchel from county records, because small towns beat empires by arriving with receipts. She's not just dispatch. She's also a part-time clerk, and she had a stack of lien forms stamped received but not recorded, all bearing my address and Karen's signature and a notary seal that belonged to a woman who died 2 summers ago. Alma set the stack on the table with the care you give a newborn or a bomb. That changed the temperature. The trooper's radio crackled. The deputies took a step that isn't exactly a step but is the space a step would need. The marshal's eyes recalculated the room again. The windbreaker man, in cuffs by the hall tree, went pale and then tried to look bored. The sheriff asked Karen where she got the seal. She said she didn't know what he was talking about, and then the doorframe heard a tap-tap-tap of footsteps and Daniel, the HOA vice president, arrived late, sweating, a cardboard box in his arms labeled compliance. He froze when he saw the circle of law. The marshals asked him to set the box down. Out spilled orange stickers, blank notice forms, and a burner phone which lit up and flashed a notification that said, "From K, use the badge, make him comply." Jenkins didn't blink. Her mouth pressed into a line that could have cut wood. When the cuffs clicked on Karen, they sounded smaller than I'd imagined they would sound, like jewelry. She didn't weep. She yelled. She said the marshals were retaliating because of family issues, which is a fancy way to avoid saying I did what I did because I thought nobody would stop me. She called me a freeloader and a liar and a traitor to the neighborhood and asked how we would ever have order if people like me were allowed to sell cabins without her blessing. Sheriff Cole said gently that order without law is a costume. He asked if she had anything to say to me that wasn't a threat. She told me to rot. Jenkins's face flexed and then went to stone. The charges landed like scheduled flights over the next week's impersonation of a peace officer for the Windbreaker Man, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false instruments for Karen, attempted extortion, witness intimidation for the voicemail she left for Alma about career consequences, and a count the DA called retaliation against a witness after she mailed a photocopy of my sister's medical bills to the HOA newsletter with a snide caption about sob stories. Daniel took a plea for his part. Karen hired an attorney whose suit buttons strained like they wanted out. The courtroom looked like every courtroom, which is to say it looked like a promise and a threat at once. Jenkins sat behind me in the gallery and didn't speak. She didn't have to. When the verdicts came, the room breathed. The Windbreaker's sentence kept him away from any neighborhood with a gate for a very long time. Karen's sentence kept her away from clipboards, boards, and bullhorns, and kept her from contacting me, Alma, or her daughter. The judge's words didn't crow. They cut. He said the law is not a toy and neighbors are not prey. The cabin is quiet again. The Marshals finished their training and left me a thank you note by the coffee mugs that said your ridge is honest. I built a little freestanding sign from scrap cedar, plain smooth, oiled until the grain glowed. The kids who ride the trail past my place wrote the message in thick marker letters the way kids write when they know they're part of something real. Fake cop, real Marshals HOA busted. It leans by the drive like a small oath. The HOA held a special meeting without Karen. People showed up who had never set foot in a clubhouse because they thought meetings were a waste. They made a rule that any enforcement must include a map page, a statute, and a name, and that fines can't outpace facts. Alma stood up and explained notarization in plain English. Sheriff Cole brought cookies and talked about the difference between inconvenience and crime. Jenkins didn't come. I don't know if she'll ever forgive herself for the years she spent pretending her mother's meanness was just high standards. Forgiveness like that is a mountain. You don't run it in a day. Some nights, when the air gets thin and the pines play their old wooden song, I think about the moment the pistol came up and how the sky stayed blue like it refused to be impressed. I think about how people will justify any harm if you give them a title and a grievance, and how communities survive when someone gentle but brave says, stop. I think about my sister sleeping easier because the sale went through and the bills are paid. And I think about the patrol car taillights disappearing down the switchbacks like two slow red meteors. Mostly I think about the way Truth walked out on my porch with a flannel and a coffee and made a scene into a seminar on reality. Because that's what saved me, people whose job is to keep the world from sliding off its rails, and neighbors who learned that bylaws don't beat the Bill of Rights. I'll end this with the question that keeps circling like a hawk over the treeline. When an HOA Karen invents a debt and tries to enforce it with a gun and a costume, is it justice to clap back with every lawful ounce of force and exposure we have? Or should there be a softer ending for someone who believed their binder could make them sovereign? What would you have done? And where do you draw the line between right and wrong?